This is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media. And you're going to recognize some of the faces here. Dr. E. Michael Jones, Pastor Graylin Watson, Pastor Mario Sims. We were actually together one time before on, I think the issue was we were meeting at Second Baptist Church, and it had to do with the political system here in South Bend that we thought we had to address. And the reason we're coming together this time is there's another political situation.
Which is related, which is actually related.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Can you explain how this is related?
Well, wait a minute. Tell us what the issue is first.
And then we'll go into that.
The issue is I was at the city council meeting Monday night, and I was asked to go, okay, and it was packed out. Mm-hmm. And what it was that we had an abortion clinic in South Bend, and I know about it because my friends got the facility, the office next to the abortion clinic, and I lived in the floor. And I don't know how long it was, 1 or 2 years, right next to the abortion clinic. And we did all we could to minister to those girls. And then we had a group come in from Madison for 2 weeks we almost shut it down, okay, but we didn't. But we finally got it shut down. Other people got it shut down. And now the abortion clinic is trying to resurrect itself on the west side. And as usual, as always, there's an effort to have a house or a facility right next to the abortion clinic like they always did. So it came up for vote because the Women's Care Center that's next to the abortion clinic has to have it rezoned to be there. So they're asking the council to rezone it in their favor. And the reason it was flooded that night is that they needed one more vote. They were going to lose. And miraculously, it was thought, by prayer and everything, one of the council members changed his mind, and so they won 5-4.
They got the rezoning that would allow them to open the Women's Care Center next to the abortion clinic so that they could counsel women coming in.
Yes, and so everybody was ecstatic. I mean, it was celebration. But they forgot, and the person that changed his mind probably knew, that the mayor was going to veto it anyway, okay, which he did. He vetoed it. So now we need one more council member to change their mind, and then the Women's Care Center can be there. Now, why is this such a crucial thing? Well, South Bend's unique. The Right to Life movement is kind of the organization where a lot of things coalesce, okay? So a lot of Christians put a lot of effort into this. It's somewhat, to my mind, it's a little bit symbolic. There's a lot of reality to it. And so this is where the town's kind of coming together. I mean, it's an issue. The mayor himself said this was the hardest decision he's made in his whole time being mayor. Okay? Now, maybe you guys can explain why it's such a crucial issue.
I think you have to back up and go back to our initial comments about the relatedness of when we came together out at the church before. That was because of the Supreme Court ruling. And
the Obergefell Supreme.
Right, thank you.
Legalizing gay marriage.
Which, of course, focused on the mayor of South Bend, who, when he ran initially, did not state his sexual preference. After the second time he ran and was elected, then he came out and said that he was practicing homosexual. So here's where I'm at as a pastor. Satan's first attack against God's people came against the family, came against marriage. It came against the authority of the husband, of man. And if you look at this, one of the things that just sticks out to me is a woman's choice. They never mention the man's role. I mean, a woman doesn't create life by herself. There has to be a man involved. So what they're doing is just a new spin on the old tactic that Satan has used, which is attack the headship of the family. remove the man. Because if you can remove the man, then you've essentially destroyed, in Ephesians 5 when it talks about as Christ is to the church, then the husband is to the wife. Mm-hmm. So if you can break that connection, then you've essentially destroyed, in their mind, God's power here on earth. I think that's what this is about. But Mike, we've talked before, and this is just a different tactic. What's the same tactic used to apply to this, which is when Indiana was faced with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and Mike Pence was brought to his knees. Why?
Why? I think that why is because let's go back to Mike Pence and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and the CEO of Salesforce comes to Indianapolis, and he walks in and he says, "You got to change your law." And Mike Pence doesn't know what to do. I mean, in a sense, we were all blindsided in a way. When I look back at when we held that press conference out there right after he made his announcement, the situation wasn't mature enough for us to understand the full implications of what this meant, that this guy was a homosexual, and that then the Supreme Court approves homosexual marriage. And what does that mean? What does that mean? And then the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So let's go back to Mike Pence. He's standing in front of, he goes to meet the press, and they say, "Isn't this discrimination?" And he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know what to say because he can't frame the issue, because the issue, as we saw it the first time around, it wasn't mature enough. Well, now it's mature. Now we can clearly see what's going on. And the whole homosexual issue is a smokescreen behind basically the destruction of representative government. That's what this thing is all about. And in a sense, Pete is right. It's a tough decision, and he made the wrong decision. From a political point of view, because now he's out in the open. Okay, he thought he was out in the open when he announced he was a homosexual. No, it's bigger than that. Right. Because the homosexual is the agent of the oligarchs. That's what we need to know here. And the homosexual here is here to impose oligarchic rule on all of us, in spite of what our elected representatives decided. He's here to overrule the elected representatives just as much as Benioff showed up in Indianapolis to overrule the state legislature. This is the way this country is being run. This is the way the world is being run. And now I think we have the maturity, the political experience, the knowledge to understand exactly what's happening. It's an exact replication of what happened in Indianapolis. And now Pete is he made a bad decision. He made a bad decision because now he's completely out in the open. Okay, he's not concerned about South Bend whatsoever. He does not represent the people of South Bend. He represents the oligarchs, and he has to do this to stay in their good graces because he's running for president. He's running for president of the United States of America. It's in the papers. There are articles on this all the time. David Axelrod, the guy who put Obama in the White House, is now going to put the first gay first gay president in the White House. That's what's going on. That's the essence of the whole crisis here in South Bend right now.
Well, I'd just like to add real briefly, I was reading a bit on Jeff Bezos, who I didn't know owned the Washington Post, and his money was used to really change the laws out in the Northwest, out in Washington, Oregon area, to ensure that a lot of the homosexual rights legislation was passed. And I remember the reason that's important to me, because I remember reading a fluff piece in the Washington Post about the great job that Mayor Buttigieg was doing in South Bend. When I'm looking at almost half of the black population lives in poverty, there's 24% double-digit black unemployment here. 75% of school-age kids eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at school because of the poverty. And the Washington Post says, totally ignoring those stats that have been consistent throughout his 2 terms in office. And you wonder why. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? Because there's an agenda that doesn't involve care and concern for the people here in South Bend. No. It's driven by the oligarchs.
That's right.
Well, Graylin has mentioned it. I've been to his church a couple of times, and that's one of his themes, is that behind the scenes, who's up in front aren't really the ones in charge. You have to go into the back room, and now he says it in a very, very interesting way, to find out what's going on, which, of course, is what Scripture, I'm looking at. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, and you guys got your Bibles here. And Mike, this is Citizens for Community Media, so we're not, like, pushing the Bible.
Right.
But what you see is not what you get, right? I mean...
No, what we see, Apostle Paul, he really demonstrated that because, Apostle Paul was trained and taught by the hierarchies. Apostle Paul, he renounced the hidden things of shame. So Apostle Paul was taught by, Gamaliel. He was taught by him. This is high ranking. So when Paul had high praise for the people in the back room, because all the decisions to crucify Christ was made in the back room by the people that was taught, that Paul had learned from. So Paul understood the power of the darkness of the back room. When God brought him out and delivered him, so he renounced what went on in the back room. Because we have to remember that Paul went to the high priest and asked a letter from the high priest that he could go to Jerusalem or to Damascus, and anybody that he found calling on the name of Jesus, he could bring them bound, dead or alive. Now, he did not get this from the government. He got this from the priests. He got this from the ones that the high priest talked to the governor. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of decisions that's made in the back room. It's not made by who we see. You know what I'm saying?
Judas went to the back room and
he went to the back room. Yes,
and that's where the money was.
Yes,
they were operating. Their key to success in the back room was knowing how to dish out the money.
So when you think about Paul getting a letter to go and pass judgment on people, he did not get that from the Pilate. He didn't get that from the high priest.
Well, do you think that there's parallels to what's going on here in South Bend?
Sure it is. Sure it is, because he's trying to show us in his writings the decisions that's made in the back room. You know what I'm saying? It was not made by those elected officials or kings that you thought it was made by. It was made by those that was their spiritual leaders.
So we have the elected official, we have the Common Council. But you're saying they're not all that independent.
No, think about it. Okay, after the death and the burial of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, after his resurrection, when the angels came back and rolled back the stone, and the guards weren't stationed by the governor. They were stationed by the high priest. Because they say, we know that this great deceiver said after 3 days he would rise again. So make the tomb secure, said God. And he said to them, you make it secure. So the priest said who they wanted over the tomb.
And the guards would have been put to death.
Had they went to sleep on their job.
Right.
But what did they do? They didn't run to the governor.
No.
They didn't run to the king and say he is risen. They ran to the high priest.
Right. He said, we got you covered, because they'd say, well, we fell asleep and that's what happened. They would have been put to death.
But they had already planted the seed.
But the real owners, the real ones in charge,
was the high priest.
They had more power.
They had more power. So they went to them, and the priest did what? Gave them money. Say that while you slept, his disciples came by night and stole his body. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will appease it for you. We got it covered, because we his priests. We're over him. It looked like he's over us, but we over him. Wow. And he's going to do what we say. He's going to believe what we say. Why? They had already planted a seed They had already prophesied. They have already spoken. And so when they talked to the governor, they said, we told you that this was going to happen. But we know that when you're sleeping, you can't see nothing. So how can you? And so this is how much power. This is power of witchcraft. This is satanic. This is demonic. This is how much power. But you got to think about Paul. He says to King, "Oh, King Agrippa, you know these things weren't done. I mean, oh, King, you know these things weren't done in the back room." Festus said, "Much learning have driven you mad." Mm-hmm. Now, as long as he was going by what they taught him, he was all right. But when he started speaking truth to power, now all of a sudden he's insane. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? And so what we don't see here, we don't see the decisions that's made, but it's right here in the Word. It's right here. It's right here. What did Gamaliel say? Keep away from these men. Mm-hmm. If this thing of God, if it's not of God, it's going to come to nothing. Right, but if it's of God, you can't fight against God. Why did they say that? Because they want to stomp out the name of Christ. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so it was then, so it is now. So
in other words, it's still the same battle.
It's still the same battle.
It's still a battle against Christianity, against Christ.
So we don't see where the decisions is made.
But certainly sodomy and homosexuality, that hits Christianity head on.
Yeah, but that's where it gets really interesting, because you have denominations that have validated the deviant lifestyle of a homosexual.
Well, our mayor goes to the Episcopal Church, which allows even lesbian women, right, as bishops even. So when you say, see, this is where, he who has an eye, let him see, and an ear, let him hear, because and we've had conversation with men who have attended seminary, or should I say cemetery school. I think R.W. Schomburg calls it. Yeah, I know.
Cemetery.
They really say that.
But my point is this: you have a situation where counterfeit Christians will fight against you and say your stance, the biblical stance against homosexuality, is not loving. And they'll tell you that, show me where Jesus said it. Well, and I'll just say this real quickly. What they fail to understand, I mean, if you look at Romans beginning at 1, verse 18 through 32, when Paul talks about the wrath of God and all of these things happening because of this acceptance of this deviancy, and they'll say that's Paul, but you have to understand that Peter canonized Paul's writings in his epistles. Mm-hmm. He canonized Paul's writings. He said, no, this comes directly from Jesus. Mm-hmm. So you have this, it is such an insidious effort that shape shifts and moves and is camouflaged and continually disguises itself as being a free thinker and a Renaissance man about these issues, and the Bible needs to be updated. Whatever terms you use that has brought this about. It's unthinkable that 2% of the American society is attempting to drive the course of this nation. That's exactly what happened in Indianapolis, and that's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, they control partly the media and that. But I was wondering with Mike. I stopped by his house. He's reading City of God, which is the classic Augustine, and you were saying it's highlighting the issues of sexuality, really clear. And what was your?
Well, he was talking about original sin, and he said there are 7 deadly sins, but he felt that the most difficult to control was the sexual passion. Mm. And he said that you had to put all kinds of safeguards around society in order to protect yourself from this passion, because it was just hard to control. Ever since Adam, the first thing Adam and Eve did was they covered up their genitals as some type of sign of how powerful this force was. And I think the course of the last century or so has been a kind of confirmation of this fact from what you would call the scientific community, or the psychological community, or the social engineering community, because they recognize that it's a powerful force and they tried to harness it. So these people they're like Ben Franklin, except Ben Franklin had the kite and the lightning would come down and he captured that lightning in a jar. So they said, well, we can capture the sexual energy. We'll do the same thing Ben Franklin did. Well, it hasn't worked. And the best testimony to the attempt to do that is Frankenstein, because Mary Shelley, who wrote that book, was engaged in sexual liberation with Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, and it didn't work. It blew up, and it's been blowing up ever since. And to get back to the whole, the black family, okay, Margaret Sanger. We got, how many councilwomen do we have, black councilwomen?
Three.
No, it's four.
Four now?
Well, only three women.
Three black
women.
Okay, but black
they all voted.
We got black women voting for an abortion clinic. Now, these people, I assume, are completely ignorant of the history of where this comes from. Okay, in America, it came from Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a woman who promoted birth control. She went toe-to-toe with Monsignor John Ryan in the 1930s to try and get the government involved in birth control, and he beat her, and the government would not go along with it. And in the 1940s, Planned Parenthood, Rockefeller money, the same man who bankrolled Father Hesburgh. Yep. We have a monument to their collaboration here. The Rockefellers created the Negro Project. Now, this is a big embarrassment to Planned Parenthood because the Negro Project is basically destroy the black birth rate. Have those people stop having babies, and we'll solve all of our problems. Well, they did, and they got involved with government-funded contraception beginning in the 1960s, and you created another Frankenstein. You didn't solve any problem. You destroyed the black family. That's what you did.
So what happens to... Because this is, see, we're talking about spiritual. Mm-hmm. We're talking about satanic, demonic powers. Mm-hmm. So what happens to the guards if they don't do what the priests say? They die. So what happens to the council people? What happens to the people, that the people with the money and the power? They pay them off. Because they don't know who their deliverer is. They don't know who their savior is. When you think about this, can I read something?
Yeah.
I want to read something in our hearing. Acts the 26 and 24. Now as he thus made his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning have driven you mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but I speak the word of truth and reason. For the king before whom I also speak freely know these things. For I am convinced that none of these things escaped his attention. Since these things was not done in a corner, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophet? I know that you do believe. Then Agrippa said to him, you almost persuade me to become a Christian. The king said, I know the truth, but if I cross over, you just said it, the powers that be.
I can give you a concrete example. Bernie Bauer was state senator. It came down to the issue of the Equal Rights Amendment. Bernie Bauer would not go along with the Equal Rights Amendment. The Democratic Party turned on Bernie Bauer and drove him out of office.
Yeah. Well, that's what you do.
You have to go along. This is not the people determining what their representative represents. It's the party, and if you don't go along with what the party wants, you're out. You're gone.
Well, and see, just like we know that there's lying spirits, and there's a spirit I call a political spirit, and that spirit, when you look at 1 Samuel 8, when the issue of a king came up. And Samuel said, I'd fail you. I mean, and God said, no, give them what they want. Give them a king. Well, it didn't take long for them. Everything that the Lord said that was going to happen with the king came true. But here today, the king is not the one who is in charge. The mayor is not the one who is in charge.
That's right.
The governor, Mike Pence, although he should be the highest executive of the state of Indiana, I drove down there. I walked into his office when the rotunda was filled with 40 or 50 cameras from all around the world, CNN, Fox, all these cameras. When I walked into his office and walked in the door, when the door opened, they thought it was the media rushing inside. I came to pray with them. And one of the things that had happened during that process was, as I prayed for the governor in there, and I had asked him, because Dr. Ron Johnson, the president of the Indiana Pastor Association, had become angered with the governor at the time because he didn't want the pastors to get involved. They were very militant about supporting family rights and to standing up with him. He waffled. He gave in. And I remember thinking, well, wait a minute. It's the governor.
Commander-in-Chief.
It's the governor. He's a governor of a Republican state. You can't get more conservative than this thing.
Nothing made it more clear than the governor capitulating to the CEO. The 1% of the financial oligarchs, the 1% of the sexual deviants aligned because they have very little people, but they got a lot of political power. To give him the benefit of the doubt, I don't think he knew how to articulate the issue. Yeah. The issue, it was very, in hindsight, we can all have it in hindsight, but what he should have done is say, well, Mr. Benioff, what part of Indiana do you come from? Right. Oh, you're from San Francisco. That's in California, isn't it? Were you elected to office? Oh, you weren't elected to office either. So you're not elected to office, you don't come from Indiana, and you're telling us to overturn the laws of the state of Indiana. Well, he couldn't do it. He didn't have the presence of mind. Maybe he still doesn't understand what's going on, but that's what's going on. We have oligarchic rule overturning the decision of the duly elected representatives of the people. And he's trying to disguise it as much as he can, but that's the issue here.
So the camera now goes on, based on what you said it up perfectly, to South Bend and this issue with the abortion clinic, and the mayor agonizing, using his words, it was the toughest decision he made, but he makes a decision that when you look at the makeup of the city of South Bend, just like Indiana with Mike Pence, the logic behind his decision, unless you understand he's running for president, and to do that, he needs the blessing of the oligarchs, because they're the ones that have the $100, $200 million necessary to run for that office now. Then it makes sense to you. The decision was certainly not because of his religious beliefs biblically. The Bible is clear. You can't justify. I mean, that's what Baal did. That's what all the satanic worshipers did, which is sacrifice children. That's how you identify, well, that's satanic. They're sacrificing children. And they're also putting forth, they're proffering this thought of the woman. It's the woman's decision. Well, as a man, you can't argue that because you're being chauvinistic now.
But you said earlier, the woman couldn't conceive without the man.
But they don't mention that.
But you take the man's, all of his authority.
That's exactly.
You give her the right to have an abortion, but you take the male's right away. You know what I'm saying? But she didn't do that by herself.
But isn't that what saved Satan in the garden?
Yeah.
He went to eat.
And so look at it. So then if she chooses to have it, then you still give her dominion over the man if he don't want the responsibility. So the Bible strictly told us that the woman's desire should be for her husband, but he should rule.
That's right.
But when you look at what's happened with this, because I think that's why we was here, about the Women's Care Center being vetoed by the mayor. And so you would have an abortion clinic, but you wouldn't have a woman care center beside it, because now somebody that's on their way to have an abortion, you know what I'm saying, might look over here and somebody can speak life to them.
Yeah.
But if you was going to put up a gay center next to the abortion center, it would be all right. Because anytime you could put up a gay center across from the high school, you know,
like at Adams,
Adams, see what I'm saying? But then you would not put up a women's care center that somebody have the right to speak. Now, we got to understand, this is our mayor that's being trained. I said years ago when before he ever got elected, the first election, I said, who's standing behind you? Because you're not pushing this thing by yourself. You know, who is the force? What organization? Who are you with? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. He couldn't answer those questions. Later, see, we got to understand, the baby wolf, a baby wolf, will play with a baby lamb. Mm-hmm. Huh? Mm-hmm. You put them together, they'll play together, and no. But eventually, the alpha or the mother going to teach that wolf how to hunt. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at the situation when the mayor came out pure and, looking pure and innocent, But once he got elected, we saw his training of those that have trained him, those that we keep saying it's the mayor. Man, the mayor is no more than a little pawn in a chess game.
Well, that raises the question, and Mike knows this better, because the mayor's, both his parents are professors at Notre Dame.
Exactly.
Can you give us a little bit of what the background of the mayor is, at least on that level?
Yeah, his father was a professor in the English department. He arrived here the same time I did, which is to say like 79, 80, something like that. And what happened over the next couple of years was basically a revolution in academe and in literary criticism in particular. Basically, the thinking of Michel Foucault took over academe. And Joe Buttigieg was the man who did that at Notre Dame. He was associated with some people I knew from graduate school and undergraduate work. That was his job. Okay, now what does that mean? What does that mean? Who was Michel Foucault? He was a French philosopher, but he was a homosexual. Okay, and what did he do? In the mid-1970s, his writings were getting very popular. He came to Berkeley, okay, which means that the oligarchs spotted him way back then. So, and now it turns out that the CIA was involved too. The CIA started reading Michel Foucault. Why are they reading Michel Foucault? Because Michel Foucault said there's no such thing as being, there's no such thing as any type of essence, there's no such thing as nature, there's no such thing as good or evil. He was a Nietzschean. He felt that he was beyond good and evil. And then he made this, what he called was his pact with the devil. Pact with the Devil took place in Death Valley, 1975. He took LSD with two other homosexuals, and he had this epiphany. And what he did was, he was the leader of the left at that point. France was the leader of the left. And the pact with the devil was basically the merging of the left-wing interest with the oligarch interest. Because before, communism was Marx trying to overthrow the capitalists. Well, now, no. We have a Hegelian synthesis here. And basically, what was the terms of that? If you give me unlimited sexual liberation, I won't criticize your economic system. That's the situation that we live under right now. And that is the whole point of this whole facade here of South Bend as the gay disco. The lights, the gay disco lights downtown. I had a type of guy, a big CEO, computer CEO, the type of guy that Pete would love to have come here and bring his company here. And he invites me out to dinner, and he's thinking about moving because he's in Silicon Valley, and the rents are, it's just very expensive. Maybe move to South Bend. So I said, all right, I'll take you for a walk downtown. So we take him for a walk, and I'm walking around, and there's the gay disco lights, and they're flashing. And we walk under the bridge at Jefferson, and what's lying there? There's a body lying there. I'm thinking, is this guy dead? Should I call the cops? Well, this is the other side of the gay disco. You got homeless people sleeping under bridges. So basically, what is it? The oligarchs have created this distraction called sexual liberation or gay liberation, or whatever you want to call it, to distract you from the fact that you're never going to earn as much as your parents did. And all those factory jobs, they're never coming back. Pete said that. Those good-paying factory jobs are never coming back. This is the big picture. This is what Pete is here to do. And his job here is to finesse this. You have to give the illusion that you're doing the will of the people while you're doing the will of the oligarchs. Well, this is where he just fell down. Because he kind of finessed it. He was dodging one bullet after another. But when it comes to abortion, South Bend does not like abortion. I mean, 30 years ago, I would picket in front of the abortion clinic on St. Louis. And then they moved it because they didn't want a sidewalk. So they moved it out to Ironwood Circle, where it's kind of ambiguous and how to get out there. And then the people moved out. The people who hated abortion moved out and bought the building right next to it. They built a chapel on the other side. The abortion clinic was surrounded by people who were praying this guy to death. And he finally gave up. Now that's South Bend. If you represent the people of South Bend, then you have to give these people some type of recognition. No, you don't represent the people of South Bend. You represent the oligarchs, and they impose this on us through people like Pete Buttigieg.
And the other thing that's so insidious is the homosexuals have co-opted the civil rights movement. Claiming that that their issues are the new civil rights issues, but that's why you have the homeless laying there, and you have the statistics I gave you earlier about the black population here. I mean, every sign is that this is not about caring about humanity. This is about capital. This is about gaining capital to exploit people to gain more power and to gain more control. It's really, and so then on the other side you have a silent church. A church that is in confused conversation with each other, arguing about, well, that's not loving if you go against someone. Well, I mean, can you imagine someone showing up at the city council and demanding rights for an adulterer? For a fornicator? Can you imagine someone giving separate rights for a guy who's got 4 wives here, and he goes, I have the right to have 4 wives, but that's what happens.
Well, I don't think you ever had a mayor, somebody shacking up with a woman. See, the mayor is going to get married this summer, right?
Yeah, to his husband, or no, he's the mayor.
And they're already living together, is my assumption.
Correct.
Well, I don't think anybody could have lived with another woman out in the open and gotten married.
I think this is so outrageous. It's like this blinding light, and it's blinded us. Yes. It's so outrageous that we are dumbfounded and we don't know how to talk about it. And for years we have not been able to talk about it. And now finally I think we can put these pieces together and give a coherent picture of why he's doing what he's doing and the role that homosexuality plays in ruling over all of us. Because if that's okay, then what's wrong?
Yeah. But I think we need to go, why is homosexuality ruling? Because what's the main reason somebody becomes a homosexual? You know, Romans 1 is you deny God the Father.
Right.
But that's one level, denying God the Father, but denying the Father in the home, stripping his authority, not saying authority comes from the consent of the governed. It doesn't come from Jesus Christ, which is our whole system. Right. So little by little, the Father's being taken down in all kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. That's fertile soil.
One of the things that I've mentioned to you is that this is a tradition that started right after the Jacobite Rising of 1745. This is a time that Adam Smith and David Hume were basically protégés of the Whig oligarchs in Scotland. They had been sent to Cambridge. Adam Smith had been sent to Oxford for an education. What you see here is a pattern of people who did not know their fathers. David Hume did not know his father. He was an orphan. Adam Smith was an orphan, didn't know his father. Bill Clinton didn't know his father. He was a Rhodes Scholar. That was the continuation of this tradition. What they established at this point was, all right, we may hang the Highland Scots who rebelled against us, but we're going to take their sons and send them to Oxford and Cambridge. or Harvard. And what you have is something like the Rhodes Scholarship there that will anoint you as the future tool of the oligarchs to rule the Anglo-American empire. What they have in common is this lack of relationship to the father. Well, that's also characterized as homosexuals. They have the cause of homosexuality is father deprivation. Everybody knows this, not biological. It's a messed up relationship with your father. These are the tools. It's like we know these things now. We can watch them, we can describe them, and that's what's being imposed on us.
So the word says, because it's got us looking at people. As long as we continue to look at people, we'll never identify the spirit. It's a spirit out there. And I just want to read it because, you know, I live by this, or I try to anyway. It says, and the servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient in humility, correcting those who are in opposition. If God perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may know the truth and that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. So when we talk about homosexuals or murderers, robbers, fornicators, thieves, or whoever, they taken captive.
Well, one thing Mike brings out, and he's writing a book right now, but I think he's going after it a little bit, is Darwinian evolution. It plays a big factor in a lot of this. And from my perspective, evolution, really what it is father deprivation. And because why? Because evolution says there was no Adam and Eve, okay? And when you say there's no Adam, wow, does Christianity, do we need Adam? Don't you think? I mean, does a child need a father? And if you have a grandfather, that really helps to have one, okay? Because the studies show having a grandfather nearby really enhances your well-being. But don't you need to know who your grandfather's father was? And when you go back, don't you need to know? Yeah, you have God the Father. But Christianity's always had an Adam as the originator. Our culture doesn't have that.
There's another element here, too. Professor Harari from Jerusalem University just wrote a book called Sapiens about the entire human race. It's all pure Darwinism. So what he said was, there's no such thing as justice. That's just an illusion. All we have is matter in motion. Well, that's also the story of Darwin. That's also the story of Darwinism. He got that idea from Darwinism. We just evolved from some type of blind matter. A justice is an idea that comes to our minds, but it has no real basis in reality. Well, the oligarchs really like to hear things like this because that means they have all the wealth, they have all the power, and they can do whatever they want. Yeah. Because the only thing that we can oppose them with is, well, that's wrong. You can't do that. That's wrong. Well, if there's no such thing as right and wrong, then wealth and power is the rule of everything. Well, that's why they love that theory. That's the default setting of the Anglo-American Empire. That's when my son was at Harvard. You go to get recruited to a club. He got invited to the Porcelain for lunch, and they asked him, what do you think of Darwinism? That's the first hurdle if you want to become one of them. And he gave the wrong answer, and that's the difference between him and Pete. They both had the same trajectory. Both were valedictorians at St. Joe High School. Both went to Harvard, and then you had this parting of the ways.
But they can go to individual or they can go to university. And when they went to Notre Dame and said, what do you guys think of Darwinism? They said, we love it. Notre Dame loves Darwinism.
To get back to what Mario said about the absence of the church, that was what we're talking about in South Bend is the biggest presence here is Notre Dame. It's the biggest presence financially, every other way. And Notre Dame was liberated from the Catholic Church by Father Hesburgh in 1967. From that point on, they became a servant of Caesar. Yeah. And they do whatever the state says. So I'm having lunch with a nun from Uganda, and she's a student at Notre Dame, and she's scandalized by all the gay flags all over. Because Uganda has a special connection to this because the founding fathers of Uganda are the Ugandan martyrs who resisted the homosexual advances of the king.
Well, you're saying a lot there, but you talk about power and money. So Pilate determined to let Jesus go. Find no fault. Examining. Find no fault. Find no fault. But if you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend.
Well,
so if you're not Caesar's friend, so
and we all want to be Caesar's friend, don't we?
Everybody want to be Caesar's friend.
Because it's a lot of money. Caesar has a lot of money.
He got the money.
Well, but this is where the issue of a moral compass, because as you say, Notre Dame is wealthy, powerful, and so when things like this occur, it's natural for a Catholic or someone to look to Notre Dame to say, hey, it's right or wrong. And I think finally a bishop or a cardinal spoke out yesterday about what had happened.
Bishop Rhodes.
Yeah, but and you know, I would have loved to have had Bishop Darcy alive during this period of time. You know, I was on the Holy Cross School Board, elementary school board, back in the late '80s, and we had a situation that Bishop Darcy had to get involved, and I was the only Protestant on the school board. And when he called the school board in, he made it very clear that this has got to be run by the Bible. Very clear. I mean, and I didn't really fully understand the presence that I was sitting in here, but he was just such a God-fearing man. But here's a problem, though. Okay, so you have this great institution that receives hundreds of millions of dollars of money, endowment money, and you know, those type of things. So I want to go back to the scripture, and I think I touched on this before because I want to read something. In Matthew 11, beginning at 11, and I'll just read down 12, 11 and 12, it says, "Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist." Well, for obvious reasons, John the Baptist approached, you know, the rulers and said, hey, what you're doing is not right. Okay, so, but let me finish here. And then it says, "Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence, and violent people have been raiding it." Now, here's the thing. The problem is the body of Christ is not taking what Jesus, when he said it's finished, he already won the victory. But we walk around like, oh, woe is me. How can this mayor do? When we don't realize Ephesians 6, 10 through 20, you know, to the end says it's a spiritual battle.
That's
There are powers and authorities and administrations that's behind this. Because the church is not behaving like John the Baptist. Because the church is not forcefully taken the victory. He's already won the victory. The church is co-opted, is made impotent, is made ineffective. The church, through Notre Dame as an example, has been bought out, going back to Father Hesburgh, who they put next to Dr. King in a statute to show you, well, okay, Dr. King, you're okay, but Father Ted, who probably appeared at one of Dr. King's programs and certainly didn't get hit with a brick in Chicago, or never placed himself to be hit, you know, with a brick or anything, and certainly was not a threat for assassination. So that tells you the impact he had on the world. So my point is, we have to remember that we as believers have the answer. It's not the spirit of politics. You know, Buttigieg and those people will continue with their father's plan. He's serving his father.
Yeah, true. That's
our
right.
problem is that we're not serving our father.
Let me contextualize. I'd like to contextualize this. What was the original sin at Notre Dame? It was contraception.
Yes.
That's the thin end of the wedge. That's how the camel got his nose under the tent. Hesburgh staged a series of secret conferences for the Rockefellers to basically subvert the Catholic teaching on contraception, on birth control. Got all these theologians, paid them money, all that Rockefeller money went to them. And what did that do? That separated procreation from the sexual act. And once you separated procreation from the sexual act, once you said that the sexual act had nothing to do with having children, well, then what's wrong with being a homosexual?
Yeah.
He paved the way.
Yeah.
Notre Dame paved the way for this fact. And I know people like, there were people like Charlie Rice, who has gone to his reward, who would say this to Hesburgh in the 70s. if you disconnect these two things, how are you going to say no to homosexuality? Well, now the chickens have come home to roost.
Yep. Yep. And the voice of the church is essentially silenced.
And why did he do it? For money.
Yeah.
Same thing Judas wanted.
Judas, exactly.
He betrayed the Catholics for money. Yeah. Judas betrayed Christ for money. And it's government money.
Well, Graylin has seen that locally, where oftentimes people are taking a stand. Well, when we stood there at Second Baptist out there in Fillmore on this issue, as things kind of paid their sins out, we saw that not everybody could hold firm.
They began backing up. A lot of those who, if we look at that picture, and I've got it hanging in my church with Mike reading his prepared notes, which are extremely touching. You couldn't gather that same group together if you called a press conference on this issue.
Now, do you think
but let's put it this way: you've opened a whole new group of people. Yeah. You got this was the biggest mistake he ever made, because now you got all these right-to-lifers who were suddenly the scales fell from their eyes. Because I don't think homosexuality is as obvious an issue as abortion. I mean, I think especially among the 20-year-olds. I think the 20-year-olds, that generation, have been completely brainwashed, and they don't see any victim in homosexuality, whereas everybody sees a victim in abortion.
Well, we're murdering children.
Everybody sees a victim. There's no way around it, and that was the big mistake that Pete made. He was forced into it because he wants to be president, and you have to go along with the plan, and this is the plan. But he made a big mistake, because this town is not pro-abortion at all.
Homosexuality nor lesbian can produce children.
Correct.
That's right.
And the logical conclusion is, if everybody in America or throughout the world supported that, we would cease to exist as a human race within generations, because you couldn't reproduce.
That's right.
Well, when I was at Notre Dame in 1973, we said this before, I was majoring in psychology just because, I didn't even choose it, there it was. But they still taught us then that it was a mental illness.
Yeah.
Okay? Then, Mike knows the history of it, it was backdoor maneuvering completely that got it off the list of mental illness.
Right.
Complete money and backdoor maneuvering. There wasn't any...
Yeah, I mean, just back then, nobody took this seriously back then.
It was something to be hidden. You weren't proud of it.
I was, Earth Day in Philadelphia with that. This was not part of the plan back then. Homosexuals, I was in high school, I hitchhiked everywhere. And you knew that if you're hitchhiking late at night and some guy picks you up, you got a chance that it's a homosexual. These are the people this is what homosexuals were.
Right.
But we don't see the power. Well, I ain't going to say we don't. But the power of that is that, I believe the power of that is that they did not come out the closet. God exposing them.
Okay.
Because what we was doing, we was sending our kids to the priests, to the professors, to the lawyers, to the doctors. And these kids, these people of power, law enforcement, was molesting our children. And we could say, there's no way they would do that. So God had to begin to expose principality and spiritual wickedness in the high place. So you'll think twice now before you send your child to gymnastics, before you trust your child with the teacher, because your child couldn't tell you, but these teachers and these professors and these people with power, they were raping and they was molesting in our children and funneling them from babies, from youth. And God had to pull the covers back to show us what we had been trusting in and what they had been doing. So look at all the people that's going down for the sex acts that they have committed down through the years. You know what I'm saying? But if God don't pull those covers back, you'll see nothing wrong with your child going to the Catholic school, or you see nothing wrong with your child being isolated with the gym teacher. You see nothing wrong because you never saw. You see nothing wrong with your child riding with the police officer. We better think. We see nothing wrong with our children staying at the school with the tutor, and all of these people See, what God is exposing, nobody wanted to come out of the closet. Well, God had to bring them out to show us the power of this perverted.
Well, I think part of it is the whole evolution to minimize original sin, which is what Mike's reading Augustine. Augustine is saying, no, because of original sin, because of who we are in our sinful state, you have to structure society in a way that protects people from, number one, the strong sexual passion that people have. And we have failed to do that.
Well, they were told to. They were told to. They were told to act on their, everyone was told to act on their impulses back then.
We were being encouraged.
And everybody did. Now, people have different impulses. You know, most people have normal impulses and they act on it. So if you go to the Catholic Church, most men are heterosexuals, so they married nuns and left. That concentrated the number of homosexuals in the priesthood because there was no incentive for them to leave. Right. You know? Right. So we were all told to do this, and then suddenly, who got punished? Now, we just went through a scandal in Hollywood. Okay, Harvey Weinstein, okay? And we realized it was a cesspool. It was a moral cesspool. Now, how many lawsuits have been filed against Hollywood?
No, only against Bill Cosby. And Bill Cosby was only doing, and I'm not defending, of course. Exactly.
But he learned it from the leaders.
The funny thing.
The story there is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was the guy that stabbed Cosby in the back. It was in the Atlantic. He was the one who did article after article. But you're right. He was suddenly, I think he was going to buy a network.
NBC,
he was going to buy something, and suddenly,
he stepped out of boundary. It's like the chess game. Every piece on the board, know what is on the board and designed to do. If you make the wrong move, you're off the board by the powers that be. And so when we keep looking, pouring at one thing, but Jesus came to expose sin, not just one act, the nature of sin. You know what I'm saying? Because everybody's not a homosexual, everybody's not a murderer, robber, you know, and we judge people. We got judges that judge people, send them to prison for life because maybe they stole something, they killed something, they sold some drugs, but yet he's practicing adultery. He's practicing fornication. Does God going to his sins is lesser. The power of sin. We don't preach on sin no more. We don't deal with sin. It's bigger than just abortion and homosexuality and murder. It's envy and hatred and jealousy and strife and debate and racism and all these things. And God, because I go rob a bank, that don't make me a sinner. I robbed the bank because I was a sinner. Because I go and shoot somebody, that don't make me a sinner. I shot them because that's what sinners do. They sin.
Right. Now, we only got a minute and a half left.
I just want to say real quick, I mean, it goes back to John the Baptist. It goes back to what Jesus said in Matthew 11:12. You know, we're not doing our job as Christians. You know, saying to the leadership, you know, you're the one that God condemns. It's easy for a judge to judge the man who stole the battery out of your car when the judge is sitting there, you know, a homosexual or a fornicator, because John the Baptist is not pointing at the judge.
Amen.
We have got to take back what God has already said. We've got to speak truth to power.
Amen.
So what we're looking at here is if one of the council members, there's 3 African-American ladies, and the president of the council, if one of them switches, then the Women's Care Center can purchase that building.
Well, someone's got to pose the question: Do you support the Negro Project?
Yeah.
Because this is the current day version of the Negro Project. So we want you on record. Do you support it or not?
Right. Yep. And they, I think they are not wanting it. Well, could be willful ignorance. Okay. This is Citizens for Community Media with Graylin, Mario, and Mike, and maybe we'll get together again, but till next time.